All right, let's just jump right in. When I say the name Genghis Khan, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For most of us, it's just this one-dimensional image of pure brutality. But what if that's not even half the story? Today, we're going to look at Genghis Khan as something else entirely. Not just a conqueror, but a true revolutionary. A guy who didn't just topple empires, he completely smashed the rulebook on how power even works.
And look, let's get one thing straight from the jump. That reputation, he totally earned it. The scorched earth, the city sacked and burned, the sheer mind-boggling scale of the conquest, you can't deny any of that. The man was brutal. There's absolutely no way to sugarcoat it. And that's the familiar bloody starting point for his story, right?
But here's where we take a hard left turn. What happens if we look past the battlefield for a second and actually look at the organization he built? I mean, that's the real question we're digging into. What if the methods of this 13th century warlord hold up a really stark, really uncomfortable mirror to our own ideas of leadership today?
To get the leader, you first have to understand the outcast. His whole philosophy wasn't dreamed up in some palace. Oh no, it was forged in the fire of real hardship. This wasn't power that was inherited. This was power that was clawed for and earned.
You see, before he was the legendary Genghis Khan, he was just a kid named Temujin. And he didn't start from zero. He started from way, way below that. His early life was just one disaster after another. His father gets poisoned. His family is abandoned by their own tribe. He's exiled, hunted. His wife is kidnapped. His very first army, totally scattered. He lost everything over and over and over again. This is not some prince who is handed a kingdom. This was a survivor literally clawing his way back from the absolute edge.
And this, right here, this is the crucial part. All that time as an outcast, it wasn't just about staying alive. It was his real education. He watched. He saw how other tribes worked, how loyalty was actually earned, not just demanded. He learned to see people not just as friends or enemies, but as complex systems. You know, his greatest weapon wasn't his sword, it was his power of observation.
And all that watching led him to his core belief. He figured out that real, lasting power doesn't come from just sitting at the top of some pyramid. No, it comes from getting every single person, from the lowest foot soldier to the top general, all pointing in the exact same direction, all sharing the same fate.
So this new way of thinking, it led to a system that was completely radical for its time. He basically took everything he learned in exile and used it to just tear down the old ways of doing things, rewriting the very definition of power on the Mongolian steppe. This quote, this is the heart of his entire revolution. Think about it. In a time when your birth decided your entire life, he basically stood up and said, I don't care. He didn't care about your fancy family name. He didn't care who you knew. He cared about one thing and one thing only. Can you get the job done? It was a pure meritocracy, hundreds of years before anyone even had a word for it. I mean, just look at the difference. It's night and day. On one side, you've got the old world, super rigid, static, all based on who your dad was. And on the other, you have Khan's system, dynamic, fluid, and based completely on what you could actually do. By rewarding what people contributed, he unlocked a level of human potential that the old system had kept buried for generations.
And if you think this is just some ancient history lesson, think again. The Chinese appliance giant Haier, they run on this exact same principle. They've busted up their massive company into thousands of little, autonomous teams that live or die based on their results, not on getting a dozen approvals from middle management. It's Genghis Khan's model, just scaled up for the 21st century.
Okay, next up, he gave his people a simple, binding code to live by, the Yassa. This wasn't some vague list of suggestions, it was the law. And just look at what he prioritized: trust, tolerance, and accountability. In an incredibly brutal age, he made religious freedom the law of the land. He put in protections for women, and, this is the big one, he made it crystal clear that leaders, including himself, were not above that law. And that's the key thing that separates it from so many corporate values we see today. The Yassa had actual teeth. In the secret history of the Mongols, which is the earliest account of his life, it said he had a commander executed for stealing, not because of what was stolen, but because it broke the trust of the entire system. The rules were the rules, and they applied to absolutely everyone. End of story.
Now this next part might be the most surprising thing about his leadership style. For a guy known for being an absolute commander, he built a system that was incredibly good at listening.
The man mastered intelligence gathering long before we had spy satellites. He had this massive network of scouts and messengers, and it wasn't just for spying on his enemies, it was his internal communication network. Information moved fast and it moved unfiltered, right from the front lines to the very top. There were no silos, there were no managers trying to soften bad news. He always knew exactly what was going on because he built a system designed to hear the truth.
This is what we talk about today as psychological safety. In his war councils, he encouraged debate. You could argue, you could disagree, you could challenge the plan without worrying about losing your head. But the second a decision was made, that was it. Commitment had to be total. He created a space for dissent before the commitment phase, a really subtle distinction that a lot of modern leaders still get wrong.
And his adaptability was just legendary. I mean, if his army captured an engineer from Persia who knew how to build way better siege weapons, he wasn't killed, no way, he was put in charge of building siege weapons. He would absorb technology, tactics, and knowledge from every single culture he came across. He didn't care where an idea came from, he only cared if it worked.
So, what does any of this have to do with us? Well, this is where the history lesson gets a little uncomfortable. This is where his model becomes a mirror for our own workplaces.
Think about it. He led through constant, non-stop crisis. That requires speed, it requires trust, and it requires a real sense that everybody is in the same boat. We, on the other hand, often lead from a place of comfort, which just breeds bureaucracy, blame games, and this huge gap between the people at the top and the people doing the work. The difference is pretty damning when you see it laid out like that.
And that brings us all the way back to the idea of brutality. His was obvious, right? With swords and fire. But what about our modern version? What about the quiet brutality of burnout from endless spreadsheets? The psychological damage of chasing soulless KPIs? The way creativity gets crushed by rigid hierarchies? You have to ask yourself, is one really less destructive to the human spirit than the other?
So, let me be clear. The point of all this is not to be more like Genghis Khan. Please, don't do that. The point is to use his story as a mirror. He shows us that truly effective leadership isn't about being popular or liked. It's about building systems where people can actually do their absolute best work.
And this, for me, is the most powerful insight of all. When we complain that our traditional performance management systems are failing to inspire people, we're kind of missing the point. They aren't broken. They are working perfectly. Perfectly as they were designed. To control people, not to grow and cultivate their potential.
Which leaves us with one final, pretty provocative thought. A warlord from the 13th century, a guy obsessed with results and pure merit, would probably take one look at our modern, complex, bureaucratic corporate structures and just dismantle the whole thing before lunch. So the real question isn't about him. It's about us. What's stopping us?